Nice to see you all. I expected a little bit more folks. I think there were 19 to be registered. So I'm just going to welcome the organizations that I wrote down that Jeremy let me know where you're coming from. Welcome Correctional Services Canada, Manitoba Historical Society, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I'm not sure who's here from there. No. Manitoba Children's Museum, Water is Sacred, Manitoba College of Social Workers, We Are All Treaty People, Winnipeg Urban Parole Office, MFNERC, here from the Parole Office. Okay, so welcome. We have 1 hour with you. We'll save questions to the end, as Jeremy said, but if there's something that you really wanted to ask as we're presenting, please do. We've been working with teachers now for 16 years at least, so we're used to, right? So if there's something that you want answered as we go along, please do interrupt and just put your hand up and we'll answer your questions. So as Jeremy said, I'm the education manager here at the Treaty Relations Commission. I work alongside Connie. Connie works up in our northern office in DePaul, Manitoba. She works out of her office at home, and I work out of my office here in Winnipeg at home as well. So we're not going to, typically, as I said, we spend our time with teachers across Manitoba talking about the importance of teaching treaties in the classroom. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on the context and the background, how we got to where we are. Then we're going to turn it over to Connie, and she's going to chat about the process, the developmental, and how we do our training, and why it's so important that our students learn about treaties in the classrooms. So we primarily work with kindergarten to grade 12 teachers. Most recently, we started working with the university, the faculties of education, and just this year I had one meeting with the early childcare educators, right? So we're gonna capture them all, we're hoping, right? From kindergarten to grade 12, preschool, and post-secondary as well, right? So we work hard. We have a small team of folks that work with us, but primarily there's Connie, Cynthia, and Brittany, who is here earlier, as our admin. So what we're going to talk about today is just give you a background, our overarching goals of treaty education. Connie's going to discuss the curricular framework, the milestones, and the strategies for implementation. I'm going to talk about some of the supports that we offer to classroom teachers, and then we're going to just talk about some guideposts that helped us along the way. So this is our team. There's myself, Connie, and Brittany. We're full-time employees here. Cynthia is our education advisor, and she's on contract. And of course, we have our treaty commissioner and our council of elders who work side by side of us all the way through the process of treaty education development. They were like our green light. Once we had resources developed and we're ready to put them into the classrooms, we had to get clearance, if you will, the final okay from our elders, as we vetted our resources going across the province. So the Treaty Relations Commission itself is made up of 3 pillars within our mandate: facilitation, research, and public education. So we fall under public education. The treaty education component falls under public education. Jeremy falls under public education as well. He's another arm of the public education with the Speakers Bureau. So I'm going to turn the mic now over to Connie, and she's going to talk about the processes.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Amanda. I'm on the next slide, Amanda?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us, everybody. I got here a few minutes ago. I've been at the convention center for the last few days for a history and heritage conference. So I snuck out of there and made my way here. So thank you for coming here. As Amanda said, my name is Connie and I am Treaty Education Lead. I've been involved with treaty education since we started treaty education in 2009. And so my goal for the next bit is to just walk you through a little bit of what we have done since we designed and implemented and shared treaty education across the province of Manitoba. So my goal today, and as Amanda said, I'm a longtime high school teacher. So if at any time you have something to share, some comments, just chime on in. High school teachers are typically afraid of rooms that are very quiet anyway, so just chime on in. So as I said, my name's Connie. My background, when I was in class, I live in the PAW, I live west of the PAW, but when I was teaching, my teaching career was completely on the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, next door to the PAW, just across the Saskatchewan River. I'm in Winnipeg Lodge, so Amanda talked a little bit about the initiative itself. You know, the Treaty Commission started in 2005, and it was the second modern treaty commission in Manitoba. So what is a modern treaty commission? You know, we hear of commissioners in the days of making the treaties. Really, in my mind, a modern treaty commission is a place of dialogue, a place of diplomacy, a place to just chat about where we are in Canada today. The first treaty commission in Canada was in Saskatchewan. The Office of the Treaty Commissioner predates us by a good decade. Part, as Amanda said, of treaty education was designing materials for teachers to teach. So if you think about teachers, and if you know teachers or you're a teacher, teachers are prescribed a curriculum by the Manitoba government, the Ministry of Education. But a curriculum really lives dormant, right? A curriculum, I always use this analogy, really is a recipe, for those of you that use recipes to cook. And what a teacher does, they take that and make it their own. I mean, you come to Connie's class, it might be completely different than Jimmy's class. My students are a different clan, etc., right? My knowledge base, I'm still delivering a curriculum. But just like a chef, I need resources. I need resources. Manitoba Ed just gives you a curriculum. Everything else is up to you, chef. So I am searching libraries, the hall, the internet. You're looking for resources. So treaty education was meant to support what teachers were already doing. You know how meal kits have become really, really popular? Think of a meal kit that you can hand teachers and say, here's a little curated group of stuff that you can use to teach about treaties. That's it. You pick and choose what you want. You tell your own story. So we started this, as Amanda said, 16 years ago as an initiative of the Treaty Commission. And you can see the trajectory up there. So what we did, how do you get teachers to come to training? You offer them free lunch. And you offer them free resources. I'm not completely in jest here. Come on in. You know, good. All of a sudden people show up. That's the way it works. Hey, Amanda ordered lunch for years. But you know, we really, really worked with teachers. We designed this curriculum, you know, this meal kit where teachers could grab ideas and see themselves. One of our goals was not to give teachers more work. Whatever you do for a living, I can tell you right now, you probably don't need more work. Teachers don't need chapter 75. They don't need another, they're barely getting through. I know, I'm a longtime history teacher. Our goal is, why not curate something that helps them, that can move forward. So we worked with teachers, we piloted, we vetted this, and by 2017, by 2015, we had a support package for Manitoba teachers, constantly liaising by just offering training over and over, and people came. It was interesting to see. And again, you can see this trajectory up here. What ended up happening, though, it's an interesting thing. There's two ways to affect change in my mind. One, you come through the front door. The other one, you sneak in the back door. And sometimes, Amanda, I think we snuck in the back door. We never told Manitoba Ed any of this. I mean, we're just giving resources. If nothing against Manitoba Ed, if you're from Manitoba Ed, great outfit, but government works slow. That's the way government is. I mean, it's a glacial pace by which government works, and it's the nature of the beast. It is what it is. It's slow, it's tempered. So we didn't wait for policy changes or government. We just designed it, handed it up. Simple as that. And the interesting thing is, and again, we have great friends at Manitoba Ed. Manitoba Ed caught up. They caught up with teachers. They caught up what was going on in classrooms and became our partner. What year, Amanda?
2019.
In 2019, after holy doodles, the better part of a decade, Manitoba Ed said, holy gads, there's some good work going on. The teachers are doing the work, though. I really want to, and school divisions embraced this and did this and told stories and really became a metric for other provinces. The province kind of caught up late. So this is how we did it. Free lunch, resources that have been vetted and edited, and I don't know of any other project in Manitoba that's gone like this. So the province come in as a partner. Now the interesting thing, the province came in and said, holy gads, this initiative is working well in classes. Teachers are embracing it. You know, the whole goal of treaty education, and it's not a First Nations initiative, it is an initiative for all of us. Doesn't matter where you come from, what your history is, we share this space and place, and there are stories, and we are part of this, and how do we go forward, right? You know, every day in classes, and sometimes I get a little bit scared thinking about it, not really. Every day in classes, we're making the next generation of Canadians. In a class right now, and I'm not being facetious, let's pretend in Winnipeg, is sitting the next mayor of Winnipeg, is sitting the next chief of Long Plain First Nation, is sitting somewhere in Canada, is the next prime minister of Canada. These are our policymakers. You know, your democracy is as good as its citizens. And I'll just leave that hanging and not talk about global politics right now. But we are making kids think, eh? We want them to think. We want them to weigh evidence. We want them to cast a line to the past. I'm a long-time history teacher, and the goofy thing about that is I spend my day in the past, literally. We could be looking at the Red River Resistance. We could be, but at the end of the day, when the buzzer rings, I only push my kids to the future. I can't go back. It doesn't work like that. But I could tell a full story. I could have kids examine the past. It doesn't have to be a hangover. It can just look back, go forward. And our goal was to really have teachers and students proactively involved in this. The interesting thing is, by 2017, 2018, teachers all across the province had embraced this in different ways, divisional ways, classroom-based. And what ended up happening, interestingly, there was a call for a grade 12 course. So we have this meal kit, if I use that analogy, to support teachers as teachers' guides and manipulatives. So there was a call from teachers on the ground, as well as Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and other organizations that, hey, you know what we really need is a grade 12 class that looks at treaties. You know, kids are in their last year of high school, they're leaving, most of them are 18 by the time they walk out the door. You are, by Canadian standards, a legal adult. So you know what we did? We penned a grade 12 course at the Treaty Commission and offered it to schools. Backdoor game, never told the ministry at all. Schools have to register these courses because they're not created by the ministry. It's called a school-initiated course. At least 250 kids across the province got credit in that course. Manitoba Ed is looking through their files and like, what the heck is this course? You know, kids in Cranberry Portage are doing a course on treaties. Kids in Louis Riel School Division are doing a course on treaties. So the interesting thing is, in June of 2023, the province mandated treaty education. We don't have that capacity. We don't have a mandate for curriculum. That means that all schools have to implement treaty education. Doesn't mean that they're throwing their curricula out. They're still discussing issues, but it is incumbent upon them to tell a story of Canada and Manitoba that includes a story of treaty. Just weave it in. The grade 12 course I told you about is now an official Manitoba course. They took the course, Manitobaized it, and now it is being offered in Manitoba schools as a Manitoba course. So this has been the trajectory of treaty education. We've taught folks in person when we offered free lunch. Then COVID hit, and you know how Zoom all of a sudden was a completely different word? Doesn't mean zipping down a gravel road on a quad anymore. It means being online. All of a sudden we're teaching 200 people online, like, you know, teachers are very flexible. So that has been a little bit about treaty education. Probably one of the biggest spurs to treaty education, other than the uptake from teachers, was the 2015 calls to action. You know, after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out in June of, heck, it's already been 10 years, of 2015, with their calls to action, there were specific calls about students learning about treaty relationships. I can tell you my own educational history. I had a fantastic history teacher. I went to high school in Swan River, here in Manitoba, went to the UW, went to the U of M, graduated in the 90s, never learned about treaties, never learned about residential schools, never learned any Indigenous content. Again, I'm not throwing my teachers under the bus. It is what it is. That was a period in time. I mean, who held the pen that told history, right? It is what it is. But I never learned any of this as well. So much of what we are doing is really filling in gaps. Not changing the history, the trajectory of Canada, but filling in gaps. You know, the pen of history has been held largely by English-speaking, I'll use my students' vernacular, white dudes. Nothing against it. It is what it is, right? So we have the opportunity now to tell a fuller story, and that's really been one of our goals at Treaty Education. You know, a treaty is a partnership. You know, who are the treaty partners? How does that affect us today? 2015 happened, and there was a huge uptick in treaty education. It was really interesting to watch. So our goal right from the beginning of this initiative was to simply support teachers. That was our goal. You know, Google's a wonderful thing. I started teaching in the 90s when Google wasn't a thing, when you literally had to go to a book or a colleague down the hallway. That's where you got your information, from the newspaper. I taught world issues for years. Then all of a sudden there's this magic thing you can type in. Google's wonderful because everything's there. Google's terrible because everything's there. AI, holy gads, that's probably the biggest conversation. The old essay is probably gone. I have never seen essays this good. I was teaching a course for Red River, and it's literally the same voice in every essay. We're going to have to look at education. What do you do with this? Are we going to have to change our assessment? How do we deal with AI? It is what it is. The world's changing. Our goal was to simply support teachers in a morass that is Google, where there's everything at your fingertips. How do you know what's true? There's still a lot of malarkey out there. Whose voice has been foregrounded? When you do a Google search and it comes back with 6 million hits, what comes first and why did it come first? Did they pay Google? Are they the advertiser? I don't know. So we thought we'd help teachers by curating this for them. By curating, and Amanda said, working with the elders, working with teachers, working with folks across the province. So our goal was to always keep our elders at the forefront and to infuse as much Indigenous language as we could. Even though I'm not an Indigenous language speaker, I've been in Cree territory my whole life, lived in Cree territory at a First Nations community. I don't speak Cree, but I've learned to value the language as a carrier of knowledge and history. So infusing this and really looking at connecting people through their treaty story. You know, the last few years, you've heard the phrase, we're all treaty people. You know, this is quite ubiquitous. You hear it in other parts of the country. It doesn't mean that we are all status. It means that we are all in a relationship. That's what it means. So in the last few years, we've kind of looked at the phrase, what's your treaty story? You know, did your grandpa come from Germany in 1892 and got land on the prairies? You know, if you've flown into Winnipeg, the great checkerboard that is the prairie, you know, when you're coming into the city, you can see it. That was all surveyed in 1872. By that point, Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 had been made. First Nations were being pushed onto reservations, and the prairies were opened up to white settlers, if I use the vernacular. Well, if your ancestors, including my own, were able to access land, you're part of this treaty story. How did that land become available? What happened to the people that were there? What relationships lived on the land? You know, who are your neighbors down the road? So we've really been, and it's been really gratifying, asking people, what's your story? How do you fit into this tapestry that is Canada? We've worked hard to balance the oral and the written tradition. Much of history has relied on written, and I mean, that's the way historian, despite the fact my students figured I was alive during the fur trade, I wasn't, not that old. One of the kids asked me once what I remembered of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I'm like, it's like 1941. My dad wasn't born in 1941. So how do I know about the past? I'm a detective. I have to use resources. I have to talk to people. I have to use, much of treaty history has been told in written form. Treaty 4 is behind you. Treaty 1 on the wall. It's 4 pages long. That tells the written story. But what is the outside story? What is the human story? What is the story that lives on the land and the language and the places? So what we've really tried to do at the Treaty Commission is balance that. This is the written story. Obviously, there's written records. I mean, as a historian, I have to rely on them. But what's the story from the ground? What are the oral traditions? So we've really tried that. We've got teachers involved. One of our main mantras from the very beginning is this is not a special project. Special projects live and die. When my classroom had all kinds of groovy binders that I would have gotten, and they were a good idea, but they never moved. So we really wanted people, we really wanted to build relationships with people. Amanda's a pro at that. We always chuckle, if you're old enough and you remember the sitcom Cheers. Yeah, Amanda always calls me Cliff Clavin. You know, the useless guy that just sat there. And I always call her Norm because she knows everybody. Norm, well, your cousin, but Norm here really worked hard to build relationships. Like when we met a teacher, it wasn't like, see you next week. It was like, what are you doing next year? How are you doing? You want to share? You have any good ideas? So we have created, Amanda, relationships that have lasted 15 years. We've seen teachers move from behind the desk to a principal's position to a superintendent. But because that was a treaty is a relationship. So not only did we want this project to live on paper, but we wanted to embody it too. If you're going to walk the walk or talk the talk, walk the walk. So we tried really, really hard to help people. Like when we say to someone, shoot us an email, we'll help you. We will. Shoot us an email. We'll help. I'll find some resources. Come and visit the kids in your school. So that was one too. Another thing we did right off the beginning is we mined through Manitoba curriculum and made sure that whatever we were doing matched what teachers were doing already. Remember the recipe? We just want to give you some extra ingredients. We didn't give teachers extra work. We gave them support. We worked not only with teachers, but with school boards, with ministry officials, with Treaty Education for All, we've worked with bus drivers, custodial staff. That's been fun. Some of the biggest sessions we've done, 800 people in Portage la Prairie 2 falls ago. It was a tough road. It's hard to have a real conversation with 800 people. But I give Portage la Prairie School Division credit, boy. Amanda, in a curling rink, 800 people. All talking about our shared history as Canadians. Our shared history as Canadians in that venue. We've made training easy to access. It's free. As I said, teachers, and I can say this because I'm a teacher, are notoriously cheap. So free lunch, free resources. And we kept changing. We started this in 09, 10. Holy gads, it's a different world now. Pedagogically, in the world of teaching, socially, demographically. So we're aware of that. So we didn't make a canned workshop and just deliver it over and over and over again. We kept changing, depending on what was going on, depending on what teachers had to say to us. So that's a little bit about our strategy. I won't pound this to death because I don't know how many of you are teachers here. When you write a curriculum, and no one gets really excited about curriculum, even teachers. But I'm going to tell you a little secret about any curriculum, whether it's auto mechanics, whether it's how to skate out there right now. If I had to write a curriculum, those young folks giving her out there. Curriculum is founded on what I always call the ask, A-S-K. All curriculum, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what terms you use. All curricula has knowledge in it, that's the K. This is the stuff you learn, right? The War of 1812, was it 1812? Whatever. That's the knowledge. You come to my class and I chuck knowledge at you. But knowledge all by itself is nothing. Knowledge without perspective is propaganda. Knowledge without action is trivia. And I love trivia. I swear I was the 1986 Trivial Pursuit champion. But if you don't, what do you do with this knowledge now? That's what civic education is. That's what a democracy is. So every curriculum has knowledge, things that we should know, whatever. Okay? The S stands for skills. What do you do with that knowledge? If I was out there skating around right now, the skill is how to stay upright, how to not, how to cross my blades, how to go backwards. There'd be words that I don't know. If I was in a gym right now, there are skills. If I was teaching basketball, right? Heavily skills. This is how you hold the basketball, right? What are the skills in a treaty education classroom or a history classroom or a geography classroom? Weighing evidence. Is this written or oral? Whose perspective do I see? When I'm looking at a piece of evidence, what do you think this is? Some stuff in history is funny as heck, actually, because you get to see the way people thought. In Canada, after the Dominion Lands Act in 1872, Canada invited Europeans. They put posters all over, free land, come to Canada, free land. And they targeted Eastern Europe on purpose at this time. Canadian government felt that, British people wouldn't last the winter here. A lady in a corset from London would just pass out in the first snowflake. They wanted Eastern Europeans, because they figured my mom's family's Ukrainian, strong, they figured they'd come here. And some of the literature of the day, you read it because it's their lens. Clifford Sifton was our Minister of Immigration at the time, and one of my favorite things he wrote was that Canada was looking for a stalwart peasant with a stout wife. And I just love that because my students would say, Miss Wyatt, what does stout mean? And I'm like, if my husband called me stout, the day would not go good. So when you're looking at that, whose perspective? Who are we learning about? We're inviting newcomers, and what happened to the original peoples here? What has gone on? So those are the skills. You're weighing evidence, you're looking at opinions, you're looking at contested history. Everything isn't groovy in history. Sometimes things don't line up. You're looking at the ethical dimensions of history. You and I live in 2026, and we operate in this time frame. But when we go back, people are operating on different ethics. Some of it's not very nice. Those are the skills of thinking. The K is knowledge, the S is skills, and the A stands for attitudes and values. How do we work together in a classroom? How do you respect a speaker? The kids up there, how do you not boot the guy next to you and cut him with your skate? It's an attitude and value. I mean, it's respect. These are the things that go on in any classroom. And any knowledge by itself just hovers. So when we were designing treaty education, the first thing we looked at was knowledge. What do kids need to know? This is the knowledge about treaties to understand treaty and the treaty relationship. I would argue memorizing stuff is a waste of time. You could Google anything. I mean, when was Treaty 1 made? Just Google it, it'll tell you. But I want a kid to apply. Why 1871? Why not 1870? Why not 1842? Why not? I want a kid to think about it. I want you to make a pattern. Why is Treaty 1 where it is in Treaty 3, if you can see it on a map? If you're coming from Ottawa, you're scooting across the top of the Great Lakes, treaty commissioners came, right? The first treaty that you hit is Treaty 3. It means it's the third treaty. Why in the heck was that not number 1? Logic would say that should be number 1. You want to know why? There's a reason. Because when commissioners went there as early as 1869, 1870, especially with the resistance here in Winnipeg, the Anishinaabe would not make treaty with them. They were not happy. They did not like the terms. They kind of told them to scoot out. Commissioners moved a little further west, and then we get Treaty 1 in 1871, Treaty 2. I don't care if a kid can memorize that. I want them to think about the process. That's what I want. So when we were looking at what knowledge, if you want to understand treaties, well, we called it traditional teachings. And by traditional teachings, I don't mean ceremony. Our role as teachers, public teachers, is not to teach ceremony. That's not our role. That's not our role at all. But we can look at Indigenous ways of understanding. We can look at connections to the land. We can look at languages. And that gives us an idea about how people were thinking at the time of treaty. I heard a parable once, and I don't even know if it's true, but I like it anyway. When Mount Everest was ascended in the 1950s, the tallest mountain in the world, looking, or imagine you're at the top of the whole show, looking down. Mountain had been there forever. The guy that reaches the top is a fellow by the name of Sir Edmund Hillary. I believe he was a New Zealander, part of the British Empire. But the interesting story was, Hillary didn't make it up there alone. It wasn't a solo show. Like much of Canada has not been a solo show. He was guided almost exclusively by a Sherpa fellow named Tenzing Norgay. The Sherpa are Indigenous peoples that live at the base of that mountain. They worship that mountain. They've lived there forever, since time immemorial. There's never any grand run to ascend that mountain. You worship the mountain. You don't go up there and stab a flag in it. That's more of a European view of land. The story goes that when they got to the top of the mountain, Sir Edmund Hillary put a flag in the ground and yelled into the wide open. I could just hear Rico. He didn't do that. He yelled something like, "I knocked you off. I gotcha. And Tenzing Norgay got on his knees and said a prayer to the Creator and thanked him for the mountain. It's a different way of looking at the same space. It's a different way of relating to the land. And this is the crux of treaty. It's a different way of relating. So we have the opportunity. So for kids, I might do a treaty education lesson, and the word treaty doesn't even factor in it. But they're understanding relationships, worldviews, understanding the land in a way maybe they know already. Another thing that's imperative for treaties is the idea of relationships. Relationships between and among First Nations before newcomers came here. Relationships with the land. You know, elders have told us, Amanda, the first treaty was with the earth. The first treaty, before there was a Treaty 1, before there was a Piguisa, the first treaty is with Mother Earth, our relationship with the land. And then we go into numbered treaties, etc. These are relationships that we are in today. The treaties exist today. So kids, look at that. Relationships during the fur trade. You know, during the fur trade, you think, I live in the Paw, first fur traders, Henry Kelsey walked through there in about 1690, 92. This is a long time ago. And he wasn't a one-man show either. He was with a band of Cree, whose benevolence and scientific knowledge moved him down into the prairies. There are relationships during the fur trade. There are relationships after the fur trade. You know, one of the coolest things about Treaty Ed is that these stories don't live in textbooks. Textbooks typically offer you a 30,000 foot view of history. Curriculum's the same. Local stories live with you. They live in the land. They live in some box under Cookum's bed. That's where they live. And you know, your kids now are the active historians. They can go home. I've seen work, Amanda, in Gimli, like the Icelanders and the first relationships with the Anishinaabe. You know, kids are starting to go home and ask stories. They're foregrounding these ideas of relationship. Obviously, history is part of this, but one of our goals was to make treaties part of Canadian history, not Native Studies 101. I mean, I finished high school in the late 80s, and again, I had an awesome high school history teacher, but I remember anything to do with Indigenous history was always talked about in the past tense. You know, I'm going to use a word they used then, Indians were. You know, I remember feeling kind of weird. What about, why not are? You know, why is everything were? There was a really anthropological view. This is the 80s, mind you guys, eh? And by the 90s, and you can see this in curriculum and textbook, I call it the inset box approach. You'd see there are 2 founding nations of Canada. And then there'd be like a little inset box about Indigenous people. Where our goal was to tell this as a encapsulating Canadian treaty story. Not Native Studies 101, Canadian. Hopefully our kids are okay out there. I shouldn't have said something about skating. It's bringing me bad karma. So that was one of our goals too. Our goal was to not make this an Indigenous history course. Nothing wrong with Indigenous history. It's Canadian history. Eh? Amanda, we pounded that at the Department of Ed over and over again. If you look at the trajectory of Canada, Canada became a country in 1867. We had 4 little provinces out east, says Connie the Westerner, even though they call it Central Canada. Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. That's 1867. Manitoba joins Confederation in 1870. It is no fluke that Treaty 1 is made in 1871. This is the same time. This is what historians call concurrent history. Dates just don't whoosh, fall out of the sky. History doesn't work like that. Everything is connected. The story of treaty is a story of Canada. The railways zipping west, what's happening to Indigenous nations, Métis nations, all that's a Canadian story. So we really, really, really foregrounded that. Last thing, obviously, is the story of treaty. Simple as that. And holy gads, I know Amanda could attest to this. In the last 16 years, when we started this, we literally started with, what's a treaty? Now, markedly different. People have an understanding, people are asking questions, people are seeing themselves, people are debating. Debate's a healthy thing. So that's a little bit about how you write a curriculum. I'm not going to belabor this as well, but remember I told you that you need knowledge and you need skills. So what are the skills involved with this? Critical thinking, being able to communicate. Again, folks, think if you turned on Fox News right now. You want people to be able, kids included, look at this, listen to others and understand their perspectives. Use language that is respectful of human diversity. Express informed and reasoned opinions, right? Collaborate with others. Observe protocol when learning from elders, especially in our case. Compare diverse perspectives when looking at the past. Everything isn't a package. You know, what kind of values do we see in historical sources that ask for stout peasants or whatever. I mean, reconsider your own assumptions, etc. So that's just an idea about the framework of it all. So what have we done in this last bit? And thank you for sitting. It's been an interesting ride, folks. As of June 2023, treaty education is mandatory. Only province, Saskatchewan mandated treaty education about a decade ago, but it was a really soft mandate. And I don't say that in a negative way, it never really flew. The ministry mandated this. Other provinces are looking at us now. In Manitoba, Manitoba teachers and schools should be really proud of themselves. Other provinces are kind of like, holy doodles, what's going on there? You know, teachers kind of just went ahead and did stuff on their own. You know, we provided online training. We meet you wherever you want to be met. We've worked, as Amanda said, with faculties of education. We've had Nova Scotia come and visit us a few years ago. They were looking at the same thing, the Mi'kmaq experience, the peace and friendship treaties, how they could bring this to their schools. By the way, fun fact, do you know that even New Zealand had a kick at treaty education a few years ago? Treaty of Waitangi. You know, looking at this relationship between newcomers and Indigenous peoples. Other jurisdictions have looked, I know you've talked to folks in Ontario, we've got a meeting with folks in Alberta, so other people are looking and, you know, are doing great work too. We actually delivered a post-secondary course over 3 summers or 4? 4 summers. Elder accredited post-secondary course. We had teachers and non-teachers show up and hang out with us for a week on the land with the elders, learning about treaties. That was really gratifying. And we've been really, really lucky. We've worked with CBC. We've worked, and a lot of this, folks, is just going back to the Canadian history that people took and minding the gap. That's all it is, just going back. And we've worked with CBC, the Manitoba Museum. CBC was a good one because we worked with them online during COVID. We did training with CBC staff. And I tell you, it was daunting and humbling when you hear like television journalists, hello, Janet Stewart here online. Meanwhile, I'm fumbling over my words. But we've been really, really, really lucky as an organization to see this go across really the country. Some of our noteworthy projects that we've been fortunate to be a part of is the exhibit at the Manitoba Museum, if you've been there. It's called We Are All Treaty People. That actually started as a temporary exhibit. It actually started as a bit of a dialogue between the commission and the folks at the Manitoba Museum and the Barron's family, right, from Barron's River, Amanda? And they actually had Chief Barron's chief suit, his medals, and they donated to the museum for a temporary. Well, it was so successful, it is now a permanent exhibit in the museum. It's a permanent, and it just started as a dialogue. Since then, the Manitoba Museum, I really admire them. They've really gone over much of their stories and tried to tell a story not off the boat coming in from Europe, but from the folks standing here on the ground. And many museums have done this, and they've really worked hard, and we were lucky to play a role in it and watch their awesome work. We partnered with CBC a few years ago, and they did a feature on treaty. What is treaty? What does it mean to us as Canadians? In 2018, we partnered with Canada's History Society. Remember they published, it was called the Beaver magazine, and then about a decade ago, they changed it to Canada's History. I kind of pine for the beaver, but that's okay. Their headquarters are here in Winnipeg, at the University of Winnipeg, Canada's National History Society. So we partnered with them on a special publication that only focused on treaties. I keep saying the word treaty, but if I have to leave you with one word when you guys scoot out, the most important word in my mind is relationship. Treaty's there, but it's the relationship that we have as people in this country going forward. That was a lot of fun, and that is a cross-Canada trajectory. So they look at treaties in other parts of Canada. Yes, sir.
Can I go back a couple slides?
Yeah.
That pie chart that you had, I wanted to take a quick picture.
You sure can, yeah. And by the way, folks, I know I said this several times. You have our contact now. We'd love to hear from you. You know, there's been such good work in communities. I know some folks at the UW and the MNF have been looking at Métis focused projects. Like, there's some really good work going on. Really good work going on across the country. Is that okay? You got
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Anybody else?
Another question.
Yeah.
So is this mostly focused on the number of treaties? Because obviously there's like peace and friendship, the Grand Pay,
Yeah.
modern lands claims,
Yeah.
Manitoba Act, all that kind of stuff? Or is it most, because I find problems, I'm not a teacher, but I lived in 5 now.
Yeah.
They focus on their locality, which
Yes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But they seem to neglect, like, it is very different if you're in the Douglas treaties, Fort Victoria treaties versus Quebec Grand Pay.
100%.
Right?
So our overarching focus is a number of treaties, but you will look like we have a series of lesson plans from K to 12. You will find information on the Douglas treaties, the peace and friendship treaties. Yeah, so good question. Peg-with-Selkirk Treaty, the J Treaty, which is very interesting right now. You see, the Canadian government kind of said to Indigenous folks, be careful crossing the border using the J Treaty because of ice in the States. It's flat out.
And do you consider modern like lands claims agreements to be treaties? Some do, some
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, we
Okay.
use it, and I'm glad you said that because, and it depends on the grade. By the time you're in grade 11 and 12, you might be looking at, or even treaty land entitlement, like the old Capion barracks and stuff. Absolutely. By the time kids are, say, grade 9 and up, absolutely. Interestingly, you know what they look at in kindergarten? Because this is a K to 12 initiative. What's a promise? Literally, we could take this to court. Hey, who's my neighbor? You know, that's a good question. So the overarching focus is the numbered treaties, but we do not leave out other ones. There are the grade 8 document actually has kids look at the Treaty of Waitangi just as a measuring stick. You know, we also have kids in one of the documents look at the Sami people, indigenous peoples in Scandinavia, other experiences. Bolivia, they, in the early 2000s, wrote a treaty with Mother Earth. It's called the Treaty of Mother Earth. So good question. And again, if you were in class, you have that latitude as a teacher. You know, let's say right now, I tell you, if I was in grade 11 right now, I'd really be looking at the J Treaty just because of what's going on right now. Awesome question, though. Anyone else?
Primarily focused K to 12. Is there anything for those that are adults assessed on the K to 12 learning?
Yes, we have worked with Amanda Adult Learning Centers a little bit, but not specifically.
Yeah, that's our next target.
That's our next step. And what they've done, Adult Learning Centers right now, is basically take our high school stuff and adapt it the best they can.
So
Yeah.
my take is from a reintegration perspective. So I was wondering if those target groups could be met for Indigenous Métis solely in outreach programs in the community and within the organization that we could approach them.
That's excellent. Matt is writing this down. We haven't done that yet. Our focus has been K to 12. I'm glad you asked that. But K to 12 is almost a sailing ship now. I mean, the teachers are doing, so we've been looking at early childhood and adult learning is looking at it through an andragogical approach rather than a pedagogical, right? I'm glad you brought that up. So we are fluid, but absolutely. Amanda's probably going to get your name when you leave because that's super. Any other questions?
That ties to the baseline is talking about the kids, but not adults.
You're right. Or the general public, right? Yeah, the general public in a lot of, like, we have, when we were working with folks like bus drivers and custodial staff and that, you know, they're not coming from the teacher's desk. They're really going back to their high school learning or whatever and kind of relearning. Kind of relearning stuff again or expanding their learning, I guess. So that really is our next step too. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation, and yeah, I think our team or our organization will be excited for what the future has. This back row here, I don't know why we took the back row. We can move the front.
Hey, the cool kids sit at the back.
Yeah, I guess that's what we were thinking. But like, we work for Correctional Services Canada, so there's two things I was kind of thinking about is, you know, some of the determinants of like crime, education is a key component. And for us in Manitoba, but across all of Canada,
Yeah.
Indigenous folks make up a large
They do. Yeah,
portion
I know that. Yeah.
of corrections.
Yeah.
And so that's one of our key
Oh, that's awesome.
corporate objectives is to
Yeah.
reduce that.
Yeah.
But you know, it's interesting in government because there's conflicting things that occur. So even though it's a corporate objective, we're scaling back our education stuff to
Yeah.
contribute to things. And so I think that is a key thing is educating
Yeah.
our men and women who are incarcerated.
I agree.
Because some of their reasons for committing crime or living in the situations they are
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
history that you're
Yeah.
teaching. And then the other half of that is we work in a system that has very few Indigenous employees.
Yeah.
And and they all have their own level of understanding.
100%.
So we could do a much better
Yeah,
job at educating our staff
Yeah.
on this
yeah,
relationship.
absolutely.
It comes down to, you have a target group, everyone always has a target group,
Yeah.
however, it comes down to the
Yeah.
individual wanting to accept that, and the individual, for whatever reason, not having pride in who they are.
Yeah.
So this could add that component.
I agree with you. And you know, the grade 12 course I mentioned fleetingly, the first cluster or unit, whatever you want to call it, is identity. You know, kids or adults, I don't care if you're 45 years old, who am I? You know, and to be proud of that. You know, Indigenous folks have a history of pride. You have history, and people never got that in school. And you know, if you don't get identity, if you don't get it in school, you'll find it on the street. You'll find it somewhere else. And we know that. We know that. So yeah, that's a really, by the way, I forgot to tell you that we did work quite a bit and helped co-create a series of training guides actually for a newcomer organization here in Winnipeg. We worked with them. They were designing training manuals for their staff and newcomers coming to Canada, knowing a lot of stereotypes about Indigenous folks. You know, the first people they see is on Main Street, so that forms their opinion of Indigenous folks, you know, again. So that project was taking them through this trajectory and having them see where we are, why we are here, and how they fit into it too. So I'm just excited I could see this now in my head. Great questions. So our goal right from the beginning, I think, is just to be an ally and a partner in education in a good way by offering resources, by offering professional development, we constantly are, like we have a treaty kit, you know, you literally open it up and there's teaching stuff, but there's all kinds of stuff online too, so teachers can constantly go back. And you know, when folks like you say, boy, I wish we had blank, 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 we usually do that then. Like that's what drives us forward, is the ask from the community. A few years ago, we started offering, did I kill my, oh no, I thought I killed my mic, in-school support. So we have teachers that go out, I mean, if you're a teacher. We have a summer institute. You might want to join this. We have a monthly e-newsletter that goes out to about 3,500 folks. It's aimed at teachers, but we have many just general public folks. And it's just key things in treaty, updates, what's going on, resources. And then I mentioned the grade 12 course. So that's some of the stuff that we've been doing at Treaty Education. That's the kit itself. Again, I could see the kit itself is a teaching kit. Probably my favorite thing is that treaty mill. It's the size of a pie plate. In real life, they're not that big, right? They're like about this big in real life. But it's a teaching tool. You can tell the story of treaty by looking at the images on that metal. Heck, you could do this in grade 4. I see two men who look fairly equal. They're shaking hands, a hatchet buried. On the other side is Queen Victoria, the promise of the crown. You know, this really is the benevolence of Indigenous nations. We always chuckle at the imagery. Nobody looked like this in the 1870s. I mean, this is very stylized. My grade 11s used to laugh at the Indigenous guy with no shirt on. Like you could tell the imagery, this would have been made in England somewhere, right? I live in the PA, and our treaty, we signed it in the fall of 1876. I used to tell my students, I'm almost positive our chief had a shirt on. But they're just little things you could grab, little ideas. There's timelines, there's little things.
If you look like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the kids always liked the commissioner's hat too. Like nobody dressed like that in the 1870s again. But it's a good teaching tool. It's a good discussion starter. You know, I started my unit on World War I all the time with that treaty medal. And the kids would wonder, what in the doodles is she throwing a treaty medal out in World War I? After the First World War ended in 1918, statistics tell us that at least 1 out of every 3 able-bodied First Nations and Métis men went to war. This is a country that has been egregiously terrible to you. I can't pussyfoot around it. They are the grandchildren of the signatories of this treaty. This treaty was a promise of the crown. It meant something. Even if it didn't mean anything to the crown, it meant something to the signatories. And we can see this for generations later. So it's a fantastic teaching tool, you know. And this is just, we're constantly developing new resources and stuff. And this we come up with a couple of years, and some of the postcards. I told you that, you know, the tagline, nobody owns the tagline, by the way. We are all treaty people. It's quite ubiquitous. We started this one. What's your story? You know, where do you fit? You know, as a longtime teacher, I always think the role of education, and when you leave here today, I hope you leave in a sea of questions. Education isn't about answers, it's about questions. Why am I here? Who am I? Why do I matter? You know, go look at AI for answers. Ask questions. That's what you want. And this really says, we all live here. Who are you? How do you fit into this? And I think about your folks, you know, in the system. You know, who are you? You matter. What's your story? You matter in the past, you matter in tomorrow too. Your story counts, whatever it is. So that's one of our latest things we've done. Well, folks, you can see basically our guideposts. Maintain relationship. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, look at I'm the education coordinator at the Children's Museum, and so our
Oh.
is like really little kids, and a lot of times they haven't like talked about treaty or indigenous communities
Yeah.
yet. Like, what's a good starting point to get them talking about indigenous communities?
Yeah, you know.
Especially like kindergarten one, they just have not talked about
Yeah.
it at all at school.
Yeah.
Like, where do you start?
A good one is actually the treaty medal. I've seen kindergarten teachers use it to tell stories. You know, there's two folks here. What are they doing? They're shaking hands. They must be friends. I think they're making a promise. You know, and what we've done actually, we've given kids handouts of the treaty medal, and we give them a blank circle. We can give it to you and have them color their own story on the other side.
Okay.
Like whatever you are.
Yeah, we do something really similar. We'll give them like a rock.
Yeah.
And then it'll be their story stone. So, like,
Yeah.
their story on the rock.
Pretty much the same. And what do the kids get at the end? That we're partners with somebody. I mean, they're not leaving and thinking about the legalese of Treaty 4.
No. Yeah, we're trying to, like, our goal, I think, is
Yeah.
it's still like the fact that there's respect, that there's a relationship, that like people have to work together.
Exactly.
Okay.
So your rock story is a good one too, but I love stories. Stories, it doesn't matter if you're 55 or you're 5. You know, stories are the great binder of humanity. And you know, we've worked with all kinds of communities, and we'll have elders tell a story, you know, from an indigenous perspective. They'll have a newcomer who has literally interesting links from another country. Hey, Amanda, we've had that lots. I would start with that. What's a promise? What's my friend? Who am I? I'm a real lover of just latent learning. I mean, if the word treaty just lives in their head for 5 years until they have somewhere to put it, you've done well. Good question. Our goal, as you know, you can see all this, to maintain relationships. So you're not far from us. Come again. You know, and you can see, I think I went over most of this. And really, I think this one, provide a framework for people to see themselves. It's simple as that, whoever you are. And again, I think of you folks in the back, you know, to see yourself in this, that you have a place and a space and you contribute. You know, I think of where we are now, we're in 2026, and I think we're almost getting to the end. We have over where Jeremy's standing, a 4-volume set of elders' teachings, and it's literally as it is. The commission traveled all over the province and went to elders in all of the different nations and languages and just captured ideas. Simple as that. And I look at it often to guide myself, and I love this. This comes from volume 1. And I think about where we are right now today. You know, First Nations in Manitoba have a unique understanding of the world that's based on this concept of giftedness. And I think of your folks, everyone has a gift. It doesn't matter who you are. You have a gift. Maniguzuin, and I'm mispronouncing it. Our people know that an individual is in the right place at the right time for the right reason. And I think we are here right now in the right place for the right time for the right reason. We have an opportunity as Canadians. And again, we've seen it in the last 15 years, the difference in discussion, or you know, what do I do with little kids? You know, I think it's awesome. And I think, folks, that is it. Any other questions? Yes.
Maybe sort of more of a comment.
Yeah.
And it probably contributes to the work that you guys are doing. And like, I'm not sure of the exact amount of time, but maybe about 20 years now, Correctional Service of Canada has been engaging with Indigenous nations. And really, I think in the last 15 or 10, with some true intention.
Yeah.
So to me, that's an example of fulfilling treaty obligations. So we have citizens from those nations incarcerated, and we never used to talk to anybody from those communities.
No.
But we do now. We engage in relationship building. So we're just one little component over here doing our job, but that's one example to me.
I think it's all, but when you say just to, Canadians are so darn humble. People do fantastic work every day, and it's not in the news, and it doesn't turn into a Hollywood blockbuster, and that's okay, but there's a perfect example. Every day there's quiet little things that are going on that are really, I'm not being Pollyannish, but things, we have an opportunity to change things. It's simple as that. one baby step at a time. Thank you for sharing. Jeremy? Well, thank you, folks. I really appreciate you coming here on a Wednesday and spending your lunch with Amanda and me.